And while the setting of the film draws heavily on Anderson's own teenage years in the suburbs of Hollywood, Gary owes his style to someone else entirely.
That's exclusively from the life of a friend of mine named Gary Getzman, who survived in show business. He became Tom Hanks' producing partner. Before that, he made films with Jonathan Demme. In his youth, he was a child actor here in the San Fernando Valley. He did a couple of films, a lot of television commercials, TV shows. He had a very precocious and wonderful way about him. And seeing that the life of a child actor was potentially limited, he branched out into the PR business and the waterbed business. He always had something brewing. He's one of those guys that tells you, did I ever tell you about the time I got arrested for murder? And he'll go on to tell you this fantastic story, which you think he must be spicing this up a little bit. And then you kind of confirm it with multiple different sources and friends of his. They say, no, that's pretty much how it went. It's one of those guys.
And what about the relationship between Gary Valentine, who's 15, and Alana? Because that's the core of the movie.
The dynamic between this precocious 15, 16, 17, over the course of time, year old boy and this older woman between 25 and 29 comes from me. I'd seen a dynamic like that happen. I was taking a walk around where I live and at this local junior high school, and it was picture day. All the kids were lined up to get their pictures taken. And I saw this one kid nagging at this beautiful young girl who worked there, trying to get her phone number. And I instantly thought that was a terrific premise for a film. There was comedic possibilities, dramatic possibilities as well.
There's a great line towards the end where the two of them are sparring with each other over which is the coolest. And I think part of the pleasure of the film is that changes throughout.
This rolling balance of power between two people. There's no sharp edges to their power balances. They sort of gently move in waves about who's in charge, who's cooler than the other one at any given moment. You have a good story when the central, most dramatic fight between them is about who's cooler. That's the stuff of good drama.
Gary could so easily have been an obnoxious character. The casting of him was vital. Did you write it with Cooper Hoffman in mind?
You're picking up on something very good, because I'd written the film and I'd auditioned many young actors, professional young actors. And you're exactly right. It tended to be too precocious in the wrong way, and irritating, really. Sort of when I thought of Cooper, what I thought about was his spirit. And he's a very empathetic person. He's a very social person. And he's very, very lovable. And these are good qualities for that type of character. And as full of hot air as he is, it's what's kind of charming, I think, ultimately about the character is that he really only has a scene or two, maybe three worth of bluster before he's really just a sort of regular adolescent. He might have all these schemes and plans, but he genuinely has got a lot of heart. His heart's in the right place. And like any 16-year-old, he has the attention span of a fly, 16-year-olds tend to give you the impression for maybe a good 10 or 15 minute stretch that they're merging into adulthood, and you can be so proud of them and how well spoken they are. And in the blink of an eye, suddenly you're just shocked at what, like, they're peeing on the floor like a puppy. You're like, oh my God, wait, I made a horrible mistake to think that this person was an adult. They have one foot so firmly still planted in childhood, and the other ones are like dangling over adulthood, so they're open, they're vulnerable.
Now, what about Alana, played by Alana Haim? Did you always have her in mind?
Without question. That was not even a scenario where you start writing and you think who could play this part. Oh, Alana. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was, I'm going to write this story and I'm going to write it for her. You see, I had different elements that really needed a home. One was this terrific story of this young kid asking an older woman for a date. I had these stories from my friend Gary Getzman's life about being a child actor and the episodes he got into. And then I had this friendship with Alana through my work with her and her sisters in their band, Haim. So the stories found a home in Alana, really. She was the inspiration for how to tie it all together. All these disparate parts suddenly made sense to me. and writing it through her eyes, writing the film as a vehicle for her.
Why would you do that? Why would you do that? He was maybe going to be my boyfriend.
Listen, young lady, you don't bring this idiot to Shabbat dinner here.
Listen, Dad, he's an atheist and an actor, and he's famous.
But he's Jewish.
He was going to take me out of here, Essie. Don't you even look at me. Don't you even look at me. You're always looking at me. What are you doing?
I didn't even say anything.
What are you doing? What are you thinking, huh? I'm Essie. I work for Mom and Dad. I'm perfect. I'm a real estate agent. Alana doesn't have her life together. Alana brings home stupid boyfriends all the time.
I mean,
I knew it. I knew that was what you were thinking. You're always thinking things, you thinker. You thinker. You think things.
I saw that one American critic compared it very favorably to Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And you can see what he was getting at, that it's about the legends of the town and the fables of the town. There are these passages when Gary and Alana brush up against Hollywood stardom, and those characters are played by the only really above the title stars in the film, Sean Penn and Bradley Cooper. Did you think of it as a film about movie making, or is it that if you set a film in that area of California, you just can't get away from that subject?
I never thought of it as a movie about movie making.
Well, I tell you what made me think of it. I mean, there are scenes in Magnolia which are very much about the difference between movie realism and real life. And it recurs in this film. Alana, she's being schmoozed by this older Hollywood actor played by Sean Penn. She says, "Is this lines or is this real?" And there's that sense that you never quite know whether you're kind of in a film or in real life.
It's such an accurate depiction of my youth, I would say, in that you would go to dinner for your birthday party, or let's say your grandma's birthday party, at these restaurants with red leather booths and prime rib and mashed potatoes, and all the adults are drinking martinis on the rocks. And you'd realize at a certain moment that there was a kind of energy at the bar, and it usually meant that there was a movie star there, whether it was a movie star as big as William Holden, or whether it was of Ronald Reagan before he was governor or something like this, but you also had the grips and technicians and animators from Hanna-Barbera that were populating these places. So it was really, where I grew up, it's the working class element of show business, right? It's sort of funny to describe it that way, but it's the best I can do. It's so unglamorous, and yet there they are. There they are, living real lives, raising families, trying to sort of, Jerry Mathers, who played Beaver on Leave It to Beaver, was like a track coach at my high school. Like, oh, there's the Beaver. These kinds of, they orbit around, and they're real people having real lives. It's funny.
And you've used real people in this. Do you know what John Peters thinks about his depiction here? He's played by Bradley Cooper. It's not a flattering portrait.
Well, I think it is flattering to him. I think he's very happy. I think the mistake is to think that he doesn't think it's a completely wonderful portrayal of himself. He's very happy with it. He sent me a note that he thinks it's wonderful, and he's very supportive of his portrayal. Whether it's accurate or not, I honestly have no idea. I was just writing more of a what we all know and imagine from these psychotic the cliche of these Hollywood movie producers of the 70s.
The film, you've said it is set in the 70s, and it'll be a bit bracing for the hypersensitive. It's not misty-eyed about the 70s. It's a time of casual racial stereotyping, casual sexual harassment, casual homophobia. Did you feel all of that had to be in to get the period right?
I suppose it just becomes functions of the story. I don't think it has to be in there to get the story right. I think it helps give it a certain flavor. Removing any of it might have been fine, but having it gives you a fuller sense of the world. It's very important when you make a film that you have to shut your mind off to anything after that time. This starts with the actors. You have to commit to that period, for better or for worse.
Things happen in your movies that they don't seem to be knitted in, as it were, to the plot. They're elements of life.
Explanation in films is generally very boring. No, it becomes, because particularly when you have a visual medium, you can see something, you see it happen, or people's actions are what drive the story forward. You see, so how they behave and what they do is what you should be left with. It should be pared down the absolute essentials. When films start describing what they're doing, that's usually when they get, well, they're redundant then, I suppose.
And you leave it and you trust the audience.
You have to trust an audience. I mean, I think an audience, there's an old rule of thumb, it's better to confuse an audience for 30 seconds than let them get ahead of you for a minute. The idea being that you have to let the story do the work. And sometimes that does mean trusting your audience.
It's a very good rule. I just want to ask one last question. Why so much running? Your films have a lot of great running scenes. The great running tracking shot in The Master. Adam Sandler runs all over the place in Punch Drunk Love. There's lots of running in this.
I know it. It's like, it's kind of like, it must be the solution to lack of a special effects budget. It's like, well, if you only have a great actor in your film and you need to get some energy to a story, have them run. Have them go somewhere. Have them go somewhere fast. I suppose. It always. Hopefully, it emerges naturally from a story and it doesn't feel forced. But there's something so cinematic and euphoric of seeing someone, or particularly two people on the run, that can help a story achieve a certain kind of liftoff. Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love seeing it in films.